Hello and welcome to this edition of Bayou Time. I'm your host, Keith Whiteside, licensed clinical social worker with Charbonne Home Care. Very glad you're joining us, however you may be joining us. We appreciate it. And always glad to see my friend and colleague back in the studio, Mr. Archie Chaisson. Archie, welcome back.
Good to see you again, Keith. It's been a while.
Yes, it has. Yes, it has. Of course, Archie, our Lafourche Parish president. And listen, this here, as we look at this week, just after the most holiest of weeks, I got to ask, how was Holy Week for you and your family?
It was a quiet week. It's been busy around the office,
Right.
just projects picking up.
Right.
We spent a lot of time on the road the last probably 4 or 5 weeks, just traveling either back to D.C. Last week, a lot of us were in New Orleans for the hurricane conference.
Right.
Trying to get ready for hurricane season and dealing with all the fun stuff that we hope doesn't come.
All of the good things,
but just
right?
trying to be prepared and kind of just keeping up on latest trends and stuff like that. A lot of good meetings with FEMA and just partners who are there, whether they're vendors or other stuff. But quiet weekend. No real big issues on Good Friday. Spent some time with mom and dad on Saturday with the girls, and yesterday was a nice quiet afternoon as well. So it worked out really well. A lot of good downtime, which after the last 4 or 5 weeks of traveling, being on the road, and just busy stuff at the office.
Sure.
It was a quiet weekend, which was always good.
Right, and I want to get to, in the later segments, I kind of want to talk about some of those things that y'all have been working and planning on and doing. But, one of those things that we're always thinking about is these weather systems. And look, it doesn't even have to be a storm for us to have to really think about what to do. We're just so blessed to be able to have the levee system that we have, the lock systems that we have. Let's talk a little bit about how that works down in Lafourche.
Yeah, it's been weird over the last probably 4 or 5 weeks, Keith. We've had these weird weather systems that have come through. We've seen the tornadoes in parts of Mississippi and Illinois and across Arkansas and Alabama. And luckily, a lot of that stuff has shifted north. We haven't had to deal with a whole lot of that since I'm guessing late February when we had the tornadoes touch down in St. Charles and St. Bernard again.
Right.
And I know Matt and Guy McGinnis, the two parish presidents, have done a great job taking care of their residents over there.
Right.
But look, as we look toward the rain events that are coming this weekend, anytime you show a low pressure system on a radar screen, I start to get a little nervous, right?
Right.
Luckily, this is not going to be a tropical event this week. Probably just going to bring in some rain and some wind over the next couple of days. But look, when we talk about things, and you had it up on the screen earlier, the lock system down in Golden Meadow that Jason has up, that $18 million structure that was built probably over 10 years ago has saved our parish a whole bunch, right? It's a system that we can now lock in vessels with, something that slowly they're starting to mirror here in Terrebonne with the Bubba Dove lock that's going into completion or going into construction. These systems here are something that we've taxed ourselves for a lot of years, especially in South Lafourche since the mid 80s. After Hurricane Juan is when that levee district really got up and going.
Right.
But that structure was built, I believe, in 2008, 2009. And it really just keeps the entire 10th ward of Lafourche Parish from flooding, right?
Right.
As we see, sea level and subsidence and things like that happen, having structures like that can block out the water, that we can control navigation and control ship traffic, so we can keep our economy rolling.
Right.
But we can still protect our residents at the same time is huge. Things we're looking at toward, as the expanse of Morganza the Gulf comes into Lafourche, and the floodgates that are going into the intercoastal waterway, and how we're going to operate those in a tropical environment or a storm environment to keep our residents safe. But eventually, we're going to have to look at those things becoming lock structures probably when my kids are, my age or beyond that, because we're going to have those same sorts of issues in the intercoastal as well.
Right. When they become parish president.
God, for their sake, I hope not. Not a family tradition I really want to see. But,
well, listen, quite frankly, we would, wherever it is that your family wants to go and be, we would welcome it. But yeah, it's just one of those things where we look back a little bit, like that Golden Meadow floodgate is been there for almost 15 years now.
Yeah.
And again, $18 million back then, interestingly enough, probably would be double that now.
Yeah, when you look at, and I know President Dove could spout off the number very quickly, but when you look at the $250,000 plus that they're going to spend to convert the Bubba Dove and the HNC over to a lock, that tells you what kind of structures we're building these days, right? And how these things are becoming more and more expensive. I was in Baton Rouge this morning. We had a joint transportation committee meeting. The parish was awarded a statewide flood control app to program dollars to do some work down in South Lafourche as well, along Highway 3235 to help some of the drainage down there.
Right.
And they were asking Dr. Eric Alavoda, who's the kind of interim secretary now that Secretary Wilson resigned to run for governor. They were asking him about, how do they factor this stuff in? And if you look at the administration's budget for this year, they factored about $157 million in the DOTD's program budget to deal with inflation. Because asphalt and concrete and all the things that they do on a regular basis are now exceeding that. And we're seeing that on a local level too, as we look at kind of post-storm rebuild. Our prices are running 30 to 40% higher than what we were seeing, pre-Hurricane Ida. And that's because of the hurricane. Everything kind of jumps up after a storm.
Right.
But now that we're almost 2 years out from the hurricane, you would expect it to kind of flatten a little bit. But we're still seeing those increases just because things that are happening on a national economic level. And it's causing us some heartburn as we try to rebuild, as we try to kind of front that money ahead of FEMA's reimbursements. And it always causes FEMA some heartburn because at the end of the day, we as taxpayers have to pay that bill anyway.
Right.
So it's been a little bit of a struggle, but we're finally starting to see some stuff move, finally starting to see some projects go out to bid from a building perspective. First of all, we're trying to get our buildings dried in and get a lot of those temporary roofs off before hurricane season rolls around again, and then really focus on the interior work so we can get things like the Galliana Government Complex, which is a huge asset for the people of South Lafourche. They didn't have to drive all the way to Lockport or Matthews or Thibodaux, getting those services in that library back up and running. So we're slowly getting there. It's been a little bit of a process, something that we've tried to keep our thumb on FEMA for, because a lot of the slow end is on those guys.
Right.
And something that we've been really good at working with, Congressman Graves, Congressman Scalise, and Senator Cassidy and Senator Kennedy. When we have an issue, I have no bones about picking up the phone and calling them and say, hey, look, I know everybody's short-staffed, FEMA is FEMA, but if you want to see your communities rebuilt, we got to get them off the step here. Need.
Talk about some of the things that y'all have been enjoying here up to Easter, and now some of the things maybe we're looking forward to.
Yeah, we started off a couple weeks ago. The Rotary Club in Golden Meadow always kicks off kind of the spring with their big shrimp boil down at the Golden Meadow Park.
Right.
Last weekend was the Hot Air Balloon Festival.
Yeah, I saw them leaving. So cool.
Yeah, it was weird to see pictures of hot air balloons popping up in Golden Meadow, but and more power to them. Crowds look good all weekend.
Yeah.
The Friday and the Saturday. A little windy, so I don't think the balloons got to fly as much as they wanted them to.
Right.
But then I think we skip this weekend. There's not a whole lot going on. There probably is a lot going on. I just can't think of it at the moment.
Well, that's okay.
And then the 21st, 22nd, 23rd is La Fête de Mon, which is the big festival underneath the overpass on Highway 90.
Right.
Benefits the Lockport Carnival Club, the fire department, the Knights of Columbus. I'm going to forget an agency or two, but a lot of hardworking men and women, put together that festival. Rides for your kids, food, bands, auctions all weekend. And then we work through the summer months, and then we get into some of the indoor stuff. The Cajun Heritage Festival down in June, a big duck carving show. The dean and the Cajun Heritage Festival group put together. And then we get into the fall, which I know seems like a long time away, but it'll be here before we know it.
Right.
And we get into that series of 5 weekends where we have a festival in different parts of the
every single weekend.
And it's been good. Last fall season, whether it was Chack Bay or the Hurricane Festival or the Cutoff Youth Center French Food Festival or La Fête de Vieuxtemps on Highway 90, everybody saw record crowds. Everybody saw records in their bank books. So it was. I think everybody coming out of Hurricane Ida, coming out of, I still hate to say the word COVID,
right,
but just all the stuff we've dealt with over the last 3 or 4 years. Weather was beautiful, like the whole month of October. We didn't have a whole lot of issues when it came to temperatures and rain. So people came out in droves, and it was really good to see the community rally around itself, help support these organizations, where they were civic organizations or fire departments or all the groups that benefit from these fall fairs and festivals. It's been really good. Cody Gray and Ian and that group at Louisiana's Cajun Bayou do a heck of a job putting that stuff out and helping support these groups. There's a barbecue and bourbon festival, I think, coming to Thibodaux in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
I saw something over the weekend from Thibodaux Main Street about a brewery festival. We're going to have some craft beer in downtown Thibodaux, I think, as well as some little festival and little kind of weekender deal in downtown Thibodaux. So, visit those Facebook pages, visit Louisiana Cajun Bayou's Facebook page or their website. They keep track really good of all the activities coming up. Bree does a wonderful job every week of sending us an email with kind of that week and that month's upcoming events. Right. So if you're looking for something to do in Lafourche, there's no better time to do it.
Right.
And we were really, last week we put out a press release. Trade and Industry Magazine noted us as one of the top 10 fastest growing business and places to live environments. And I was really pumped when we saw this, because about 2 days before this, there was a media report about a few parishes in our area being some of the fastest declining populations in the country.
Oh, okay.
I think, St. John, St. Charles, and I think Terrebonne were all in that kind of top 10. And I got a little worried when I saw that, when I kind of rewound the newscast to make sure we wasn't in it.
Right.
And about a day and a half later, this pops up. And it's because of the cool things like Port Fourchon, because of Nicholls State University, and the great things that Dr. Clune and the faculty and staff are doing at Nicholls from a programming perspective, and things that they're doing like the Coastal Center coming to the university.
Right.
Cool things like the Chet and the Port Commission, elected members of the Port Commission are doing down there with the advent of offshore wind, and we had a contingent that just got back from Baltimore last week. I was in different places, so I didn't go this year, but it was the big offshore wind conference, the International Wind Conference, partnering forum, and just the interest in offshore wind in the Gulf of Mexico, the interest in the port. We spent some time up in D.C. That's some of the other parish presidents and parish leaders working on things like the RISE Act, which Senator Cassidy has been working on. Last week, Majority Leader Scalise was able to pass what they called H.R. 1, which was a permitting reform bill, but also had his version called the BREEZE Act, which has to do with GOMESA revenue sharing, the money we get from offshore oil and gas royalties. Those two bills actually put provisions in there for offshore wind revenue. So as they lease these blocks of property for wind expansion, the state would get 37.5% of whatever those bids are. And then, of course, that trickles down to the 20 coastal parishes. So last week, we got a check for about $1.7 million for GOMESA revenue. When we look at places like New York, New Jersey, they're seeing offshore wind bids of $4+ million. 37.5% of that would have gone to the states if that legislation was in place. So we've been fighting really hard in D.C. It was probably a contingent of about 80 Louisianians, a few folks from Texas that went up there week before last. We met with 80 members of Congress and their staff, talking about why the RISE Act and the BREEZE Act are really important for us from a coastal perspective. But some of those inland states, it also ties to the Great American Outdoors Act, things like the Land and Water Conservation Fund, things like the North American Wetlands Conservation Act, which is a huge migratory bird project habitat expansion. So when we look at those inland states, there's something in it for everybody, right? We tell them the testament of how we use it for coastal restoration, how we protect ourselves from levees and marsh creation projects and the diversions, but how they can tap into this money as well and build ballparks and museums and amusement parks if you don't have the same issues we have, right? So it was a really good trip.
Last council meeting, next council meeting, you guys are really honoring some people that have made some good efforts in your community.
Yeah, when Councilman Corey Perilou was still on the council before he moved away, he started a Lafourche Outstanding Citizen Award, and it appears every week or every 2 weeks on our council meeting. We don't get one every 2 weeks. It's based on nominations that either a councilman will give to the other 8 members of the council or something that comes in from the public. But we've recognized quite a few people in our community. The latest one was Danny Boy Berg. Danny's been walking around the intersections of Lafourche, and we all have issues with DOTD, and we saw him cutting some grass on the way back from Baton Rouge, but every now and then they'll skip a spot. They don't really, some of the curbs we have in Lafourche are a little funky, but Danny goes out there with his weed eater and his shovel and kind of knocks some stuff out and really helps to beautify the intersections.
No kidding. Yeah. Wow. So if that's who that was.
He's been around 90. He's been around 32, 35 at some of the intersections in La Rose and Galliano. So Councilwoman Chaisson actually saw him about a month ago, and she and Councilman Wendell got together and put him up for an award and recognized him as a Lafourche Outstanding Citizen at our last council meeting. And I grew up across the street from Danny. He lived across from us when I was growing up as a kid with his kids. So it was good to see. I hadn't seen him in a lot of years since I moved away moved out of that subdivision and got my own house and stuff. But really a class act guy. We've recognized people like Chad and Trixie Boudreaux, have Joe Septic, but they did a lot of work after the hurricane with Father Greg and Father Joey at Sacred Heart. Fed over, I think, 300,000 people across the area after the hurricane, cooking meals with different groups. So we've had a lot of people walk through that step. We're actually going to recognize Father P.J. Madden at our meeting on Tuesday for his dedication to the diocese as the administrator in the absence after Bishop Fobb left and before Bishop Dorsonville got installed a week or two ago. Just crediting him for the work and helping the diocese through the steps it had to take. Really in the immediate aftermath of the hurricane. It wasn't very long after that Bishop Fobb was called out to Louisville. So he's done a great job and been such a great role model for a lot of people in our parish. I couldn't help but give him a key to the parish. Even though I think he's staying in Terrebonne a lot these days, we'll get him to come across.
There you go.
But he started out in Golden Meadows. So he's a Lafourchian no matter which.
He's got keys to both. You know, you give a man a key, he can go anywhere he wants, right? Give him a key to both of them. And look, that's a good thing to just be able to honor those people and celebrate that. It's a great idea to find a way to celebrate those outstanding citizens because there's so many of them. And it's nice to be able to do that. In doing so, you mentioned how much much you've been traveling. You mentioned all the places you've been going. Tell us about some of these projects that are either starting up or some things we're seeing to come into fruition.
Yeah, a lot of work is still happening, due to the hurricane. We have a lot of those building projects, a lot of those pump station projects that are finally going to bid. We use just about all the local architects and engineers we can.
Right.
But so does Terrebonne, so does the diocese, so does the school system,
Yeah,
right?
got a lot of those, right?
We're all using the same people, so they're really busy, and we keep pushing them, and they say, President Dove's pushing them just as much as Mr. Martin and Mr. Ogeron is from the school system and everybody else.
Right.
But they really do a lot of great work. So we have those projects, but we're finally getting to the point where we're either backtracking back to pre-storm and finding those projects in the budget that we're supposed to have happen that didn't.
Right.
So we have some turf fields going in La Rose and Golden Meadow.
Oh, wow, nice.
Give our kids something to play on. A lot of the kids who are playing travel ball these days play on turf fields as they travel.
Right.
So we're trying to give them that experience. Also cuts down on some of the maintenance obligations we have from a grass cutting perspective.
Right.
So those two fields are up and running. Mitch actually showed me some pictures this morning when we were driving up to Baton Rouge of what they look like, and they're really coming in good. We should be done in the next couple of weeks.
That's
the weather
beautiful.
holds out, and we're going to do a field a year in La Rose and Golden Meadow until we get them all turfed.
Oh, that's
It'll take
awesome.
us a couple of 3 years to get that done because there's so many fields. But new lighting coming to those parks as well. Working with FEMA to go back with metal poles versus the wooden poles, so they'll last through another hurricane.
Yeah.
And we don't have to keep doing this wooden pole trade out every time a storm comes through.
Right.
We're building things like the new waste collection facility in 182 and Highway 90 near the shooting range.
Right.
Kind of like what Ashland is to you guys in Terrebonne.
Sure.
So our residents can have kind of a centralized point to be able to do that with. And then the biggest, what I will say, the crown jewel the last 6 or 8 months of working has been, about 2 weekends ago, we had a nice little tax election in Lafourche,
Right.
where we pulled off what a lot of people said was going to be impossible, where we consolidated some very old districts and really centralized roads and bridges and drainage in Lafourche. Did some sales tax maneuvers, lowered some rates, allowed the school board to pick up some of that tax money and do some teacher pay raises with it, some meaningful teacher pay raises, so we can keep our educators here in Lafourche and not only attract the new ones that are coming out of college, but keep those 10 and 20-year teachers that were disappearing to other parishes because they were paying a little more and coming back. I've heard some really good reports that the number of applications for teachers have gone through the roof because of that happening, and that pay.
That's
So
exciting.
we're working with the districts now that are consolidated because some of them were actually still operating boards and commissions about how this consolidation is going to work, but it was something that we've talked about in Lafourche for about 30 years. And everybody says, from an economic development perspective, right, if we're going to continue to get those trade and industry reports that we're business friendly and we're growing, we needed to do something like this. And nobody had really been willing to tackle the issue because it was a very hot potato politically. And I was just the right, smart, dumb, stupid sucker that decided to take it on. And working with the school board superintendent, working with our chambers, people like the Bayou Industrial Group, the Retired Teachers Association, South Central Industrial Association, we were actually able to pull it off.
Wow.
And it all passed by a pretty good margin of about 60-40. So it wasn't like it was we snuck
It
it
wasn't
under
a
the
50,
rug, right?
51-49 kind of deal.
So it was a really good move for us.
Well, and the other thing is, very often, something that worked 30 years ago is not working today, or something that worked 50 years ago is not working today. And it's a way to be able to say, hey, we have a real important purpose for this money, is what it goes for. And so that's always appreciated. It's so very good to be able to see you. I'm very glad things are going well for you and your family. We're really excited for how things are going for Lafourche in recovery, in growth and expansion, and just getting back to this new sense of normal post the C word, post the I word, but where we're going and moving forward. Glad you're in that leadership position and taking us
Keith,
in.
I still say every day I get to wake up and work with 350 of the best individuals there are on the planet, plus all the other elected officials, right? And I still wake up very humbled every day to do this job, and I'm proud to do it.
We're glad to do it. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. All right, guys, that'll do it for this particular segment of Bayou Time. Don't go anywhere. A lot more right here on HTV.